along the way that I hope will be of interest to you. And of course, we'll be prepared to answer your questions. So step one, review the department. So you need to know a little bit about that department where you're going to go. Well, so you need to think about who the faculty are. Do you know any of those faculty? Is it a department where some of your faculty at your home medical school have been trained there or have an association with that place? Go to the websites, review the website, get a good idea of, before you go, some ideas about what the program is like. That's step one. Step two, review your own publications. It's fair game for the faculty to ask you some things about your publications to sort of get a sense of what you know about an area that you are certainly expert in because you wrote the article. There are some programs that might even ask you some things that I think are a bit squirrely, like what was the age of the patient you presented and things like that, as if they're trying to get an understanding of whether you actually wrote this paper or not. I think that is a little bit silly because there are lots of reasons why you might not know the exact age of a patient you wrote about, but just a little bit of warning about that. Review your publications. Step three, why exactly did you apply to this program? Now I know you applied to all the programs, perhaps. Every program where anybody from your medical school was ever accepted, you applied. But that's not really the best answer, and they could ask this question. So is there a member of the faculty where you are that said, you know, make sure you apply to Washington University in St. Louis? Or did they say, you know, or do you have friends or family in that city? So you've been exposed to the city, you love Chicago. Is there a particular faculty member who perhaps wrote something in the field where you wrote an article? Did a resident or faculty member speak highly of the program, and what did they say? So those are things you should have in mind because that could come up. Step four, it's critically important that you don't look like a deer in the headlights when questions are asked of you. And the way to prevent that is to prepare. So you should have 3 or 4 vignettes that you might write out in paragraph form, in outline form, whatever you feel comfortable with, that highlight things that make you different, unusual, special. What really accentuates the positive about you? And really, you should know that no one in any of these departments really cares that you became a dermatologist because there's a little bit of pediatrics, a little bit of geriatrics, a little bit of surgery, a little bit of medicine, blah, blah, blah. That they're more interested in you and things about you. Preparing these vignettes is critical. I'd start with just 3 or 4. This is the point where behavioral interviewing comes in. Google is this thing on the internet where you can go in and you can type in behavioral interview. Somehow I think you know about Google. When you type in behavioral interview questions, there are several websites that have 100 behavioral interview questions. Keeping your 3 or 4 or 5 vignettes in mind, run through those behavioral interview questions. These are questions that are not like, what is the season? Well, it's winter. There's a definite answer to that question. These are things that are probing to learn about the candidate. these 100 questions, when you look at them and you go through and think about your vignettes, you're likely to find out that you might be able to answer 60 or 70 of those questions with the vignettes you've already prepared. Then you may see some interesting questions and you say, you know, that made me think of another thing that's special about me, and write up another little vignette that you'll have handy to use. And by the time you have 5 or 6 vignettes, you may be able to answer 100, well, 80 of 100 of the questions that you'll see online. So you might see some glaring holes and they're asking things you weren't prepared for. This is a chance for you to prepare a little bit ahead of time. And if you say to yourself, this is amazing, I never heard of this, I'd say about 8 of 10 of the medical students, when I give this little talk at the University of Mississippi, never heard of a behavioral interview. And yet, every business, every medical school, every residency is aware of this and very likely to ask you these kinds of questions. If I wanted to group some of these things, they might be about teamwork, something that shows leadership, handling conflict, problem solving, your biggest failure, and then maybe how you came out of that and succeeded, something about work ethic, maybe a greatest accomplishment. I think you're starting to get the idea. So tell me about a time when you handled a very challenging patient. This is about things about you and your way of handling things that will tell the interviewer more than tell me 4 papulosquamous diseases. I think you're relatively unlikely to get that kind of question. Tell me about a time when you made, and now that's covered up, a mistake and how you handled it. Tell me about a time when you, a faculty member or a resident, made an unpopular decision that had to be executed by your team. What led you to apply to dermatology residency? Where will you be and what will you be doing in 5, 10, or 20 years? Step 6, prepare a few questions to ask the interviewer. It's almost certain that at some point along the way, maybe as the interviewers get a little bit tired, they say, well, do you have any questions for us? So think about it. Think about what you really want to know. You know, where do most residents live? Now, recognize there are 600 people on this call. And if every one of you asks the interviewer, where do most residents live? They'll get the idea that you've been to a webinar, but maybe not the idea that you really have a question of your own. This is a question I really like. There are 100 other questions, but compare the program where I'm interviewing to the one where you were a resident. That's a good question. It's a behavioral question, actually. It will teach you a little bit about the interviewer, which I think is fair game, to flip the behavioral interview, flip the interview on them a little bit, but also help you learn a little bit about the program. Number 7, I think, don't kill yourself on this, but I think you should probably be prepared to teach. So, you know, if you were in person live, you might ask for a piece of paper and be prepared to make a little drawing showing the pathophysiology of a common skin disease. That might be a little bit harder on a Zoom interview, but I think that just in the back of your mind, maybe something you've written on, something you're interested in, I just think you ought to have that in the back of your mind in case they want to give you an opportunity to teach something. Step 8. Now, this one is optional, and it's the trickiest step of all the ones I've talked about. But consider whether or not you want to have a little tagline or a closer or a 20-second, 25-second elevator speech at the very end. This seems a little bit trite to me, but it would truly be a dream if I had a chance to be at your program because blah, blah, blah. Or if I had the opportunity to train at the University of Mississippi, you would find I always put the interests of others ahead of my own. Or, I love teaching. Again, I feel like right now I'm being a little bit trite, so that's why this is a little bit tricky. If you're like me and you read self-help books, you could have read a book like one by Adam Grant, whose truism is, the secret of success is helping others. So there are tricky, but I think you ought to give yourself the opportunity to think through that and decide if you want to have a little closer. Things that are generally good, a positive can-do attitude. Anything that makes you a safe bet. So I don't think it's great to go out on a line that maybe you can't get yourself back from. But a safe bet is somebody that's the first to volunteer, that works hard, and your vignettes will show these sorts of things. Diversity in all ways is good. If you were a lobster fisherman for a year before you went to medical school and it taught you about hard work, that would be great. I guess as a lobsterman, a fisherman, maybe not. Do not lie. It's very easy to get caught on lies, especially when you're interviewing with a number of people. Do not ask about salary and fringe benefits. Trust me, it's all about the same. If you're in a really big city like New York City, they need to pay a little more because of the cost of living, or the residents would starve. But it's really about the same. No need to ask about that. Politics, don't go there. There's a 50-50 chance you picked wrong. Religion, crudeness. My opinion, this is just my opinion. Don't say, I'm going into dermatology because I want to be a Mohs surgeon, or I want to be a cosmetic dermatologist. Just don't do it. You don't really know what the biases are. So there are other ways to say this. I've always been good with my hands. I won the annual knot tying contest at my medical school. There are things you can say, but it's too early for you to know what you want to do anyway. Do not portray yourself as a victim. So if you had some hard times, God forbid you had a parent that passed away, or some other horrendous thing that happened in your life, then you overcame that. That's the story they want to hear. Don't tell the exact same story to every interviewer. Trust me, they're going to get together right after a series of interviews and talk about what was said. And it's good to have given a number of your vignettes and not the same one. Most importantly, do not trash other programs where you have interviewed. Some programs will ask you, well, where else have you been granted an interview? And sometimes they'll walk you in a direction to get you to talk about them. If someone told me, let's just say I'm from UAB, and someone says, the University of Mississippi, they're the worst program. This guy, Dr. Brodell, he doesn't know anything about anything. First of all, it's amazing how things like that get back to Dr. Brodell. Secondly, the person's going to think you're the kind of person that talks badly about other people or programs behind their back. No reason to go there. So some example questions again. What makes you special? Tell me about a time when you made lemonade out of lemons. Why'd you become a doctor? Why did you want to be a dermatologist? What would you do if you were not a dermatologist? My daughter, Lindsay, she interviewed about 10, 12 years ago in dermatology. She told him she wanted to be a hairdresser because it was true. There was a time that that's what she thought of doing before she went to college and went to medical school. What makes you most proud of yourself? So you're going to go to these interviews. You're going to be prepared. You're going to recognize that sometimes you get a question that you're not totally prepared for, and you're going to think on your feet. Try to be creative when you prepare. Do not spend 40 hours doing this. This is a one Saturday thing. You start Saturday morning, you do a little practice in front of your mom or dad or your roommate or somebody like that. This is not a total deal breaker. You just want to be a little bit prepared ahead of time. And if you wanted to read something about an approach for residency interviews that has, I believe, everything in it that I've just said, you can go to an article that's in the Journal of the American Medical Student Journal. And I wrote a paper with one of my students from last year named Dave Casto. So with that, we are ready to move on. I'm going to stop my share, which should allow someone that knows how to handle this to go from here. Alana, you're muted.
I'm here. I got it. Okay, great. I was answering, we have a bunch of questions. I'm trying to keep track of those and themes. We're going to get started first talking about showing interest in a program. And I know there's been a couple of questions related to this in terms of with interview invites going out already. And let me just, before we start that, let me just give a very quick, because there's been a lot of questions about the interview invite coordinated release. So I think I want to address that very briefly. There were about 60 programs who participated this year. There were a few other programs who I know also released around the same time, even though they didn't say that they were going to necessarily participate with the same guidelines. There were interviews that went out before that for certain programs, and there's still programs who have not sent out interviews. If you have not received a lot of interviews yet, if you're worried about that, it's okay. There's still time. There will still be interviews coming out, interview invites coming out. The other thing that's important is there was a question about multiple questions about whether programs released all of their interview slots or some of them. This was variable. We did not have specific recommendations to programs. For example, in my program, we did tell everybody on November 25th the status of their application, whether they were invited, waitlisted, or we were not going to be able to offer them an interview. We have no more spots available. We are confirming the spots. If someone drops out because they have a conflict or they decide not to interview with us, then we will go to our wait list. Not everyone may be doing it that way. So there may be programs who still have interview slots to go out and others who will be waiting for the wait list. I suspect most people at this point will be waiting for if people shuffle around to get to the wait list. I will also say in terms of interview hoarding, that is a big concern this year because interviews are virtual. That means that people may be accepting more interviews than they actually need. We did recommend that people keep to about 12 to 15 at the most. The reason is that when you look at data from prior year matches, if you get to over 10 interviews, you have a greater than 95% chance of matching. And once you get to about 12 to 15, it's essentially the same, about 100%. So especially this year, because people can do more interviews, doesn't mean you should do more interviews. Think about your fellow applicants, think about your colleagues. I know it's stressful, but recognize that if you have 10, if you have more than 10 interviews and you pick your 10 to 12 programs that you really are excited and interested in, you will be okay. And that's really what you should do. And you should release the rest of your interviews to other people. It's not going to help if you are holding on to interviews at programs that are 20th on your list, and it's not going to help other people either. And that's kind of where we get a lot of chaos in the system. So we are recommending that for a reason. We're really hoping people listen to that. I will say we already got a lot of requests for reshuffling interviews after we confirm schedules. There's going to be a limited availability for a lot of people to do that. So once you get an interview confirmation, there may be a chance to switch it if something else becomes available, but there may not be. So you're going to have to make tough decisions, honestly, just like we do. And if there's a program, there's two programs on the same day, you pick the program that you think is going to be a better fit for you. And it's okay to do that. I'm not going to be offended if someone declines an interview for my program. It just means something else is better for you. And I'm thrilled for you. And we all feel the same way, I promise you. So please keep that in mind. That is my plea. And I see everyone nodding, so I know that everyone agrees with that. Okay, so now we're going to get to the first topic, showing interest in a program and standing out. So Matt, if you want to talk about that for a few minutes, and then you let Yolanda give her take, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So yeah, okay, Yolanda, I'll go first then. So I think we had a few questions we wanted to sort of answer, Yolanda, and talked a little bit about it. So and I'll sort of give my piece, and then we can kind of alternate our thoughts. So you know, one of the things we thought about, you know, and Dr. Burdell talked a little bit about this, is what makes candidates stand out. You know, so first of all, we want you to know something about our program. I think that's important, and in today's day and age, it's very easy for you to find things out about the program. You know, whether that's talking to colleagues, looking on the website, reaching out for specific information, reaching out to the residents, whatever it happens to be, because at the end of the day, we want to feel like you're going to be a good fit. We want to see that you understand the world situation. Okay, so I think that's going to be more important this year than ever. And Dr. Burdell talked about not being a victim. Look, we're all dealing with the coronavirus, and we know that it's been hard for you, but it's been hard for us too. It's been hard for our residents. It's been hard for everyone. So I think showing gratitude for the place that you're at, having some poise and some understanding, I think those are things this year that are going to make certain candidates stand out above others. Dr. Helfrich, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I think the main thing is we're looking for people who are genuine, and we want you to show your true self as much as you can. And we understand that may be a little more challenging given that we're going to be interacting on Zoom and so on. But you know, once you have an interview, I think generally the program feels like you might be a fit, and so we want to find out if that's true. So we want to feel, you know, who are you as a person? What are you beyond the metrics and your personal statement and so on? And so this ties into the question, you know, what is this, you know, what should we say when someone asks you, tell me about yourself? Well, who are you as a person? What do you enjoy? What are some of your guiding principles and your true values? And so I think trying to convey in a very genuine way who you are. And so it's not about gaming the system or having just the right answer. It's being able to convey something about your true self on interview day. And that's the same thing, you know, when you're, you know, conveying, you know, standing out and in terms of the rest of, you know, from the rest of the people who are interviewing, it's again, showing that you're interested in our program, that you have looked up the program, that you have some knowledge about what our program is like. And of course, you might not have all of the answers, but you might be able to then ask further questions based on some of the materials that you looked at, or our Instagram page, or something like that.
I think,
oh, sorry, Matt, do you want to?
No, go ahead, Lana.
You brought up what is the best way to signal interest to programs that have not sent out interview invites, or sort of related, how to signal interest to programs at this stage, because we'll talk about the post-interview etiquette, you know, later. Ashley and Janine will talk about that, but sort of at this stage, should people be reaching out, and how should they do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give my 2 cents and then let Dr. Helfrich you know, sort of pipe up. I think I'm a big fan of the short, succinct, pointed email that is 3 to 5 sentences long that says, hey, I'm interested. This is exactly why I'm interested. No fluff and stuff, but exactly why I'm interested. And yes, I think that will get program directors to go and look at your application again. If they have not handed out interviews yet, if they are looking, you know, at their wait list or who they're going to sort of plug in, it may indeed get you an interview. If you send me a paragraph, you know, 3 or 4 paragraphs long, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to be honest. I'm not even going to read it because I get way too many of those to try to give it any sort of credence. I think the other thing is be honest, be knowledgeable, show ingenuity. And I think you want to really, at this point, you're not trying to prove to us whether you can be a dermatologist. You're trying to prove to us whether we want to train you, right? I think, and that's the important aspect of what you want to get across in that email.
Yeah, I would say this again is tied into being genuine. So we know that every single person we interview doesn't have us at the top of their rank list. Maybe we'll change your mind, but you know, that's just the reality of the game. And so if every single person says, this is my #1 program, well, that's not going to work, and we're going to be able to tell. So I think if the program truly is, you know, the top of your list, you have a really strong reason for wanting to be at that program, then it's worthwhile to tell us, you know, I really want to be here because I am passionate about cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, and, you know, the work you're doing at your institution really resonates with me. Or, my partner, I'm couples matching, and my partner really loves the otolaryngology program at your department and had an interview here, and we would both love to be in Ann Arbor. I mean, so making sure it's genuine, but again, you don't want to do that at a big level. So I think have a couple of programs that maybe are the top of your list that you would say something like that, but otherwise just come and be welcoming of the process and kind of welcome the opportunity to learn as much as you can about the program, and maybe it'll end up higher on your list than you thought it would be before the interview, but just kind of being open to the process.
And then I just make one or two more points about this. So I think one thing about how to make your interest apparent, especially during the interview and in the process, is take an opportunity to ask more thoughtful, pointed questions. I don't think this is the year for what changes do you see happening in your program? What do you think is the greatest strength of your program? No. I want you to think about the pointed questions of what our life is going to be like in the post-coronavirus era, and how can you be that person, right? How can you show me that you're the kind of resident I want to have in my program in the middle of vaccination, in the middle of all the things we're dealing with? I think, and the other thing is, if you are from a school that's not a top school, doesn't have a home program, maybe you're a DO applicant, which puts you at a slightly disadvantaged in some ways. I think what you have to do is you have to rely on the people that you know and the relationships you've built. And this year is going to be more about relationships than ever. And Dr. Riddell talked about this. Do you have a mentor who knows someone at that program? Do you have someone who's willing to call or email and vouch for you? Because an email from you is good. An email from someone I know and work with is even better. Someone asked about couples matching, and you know what's even better than you telling me you're couples matching? Having the program director of the program where your partner is couples matching email me and say, this kid's at the top of my list. Can you really, really look at his or her partner? I really would like to try to land them both at this institution. I think they're both quality applicants. And that's going to mean a lot to me because I have that relationship with that person I rely upon. So that's my piece for the session.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We will also have time. Does anyone else want to add to what's been said already? Any of the other panelists? Otherwise, we can move on to the next section. And the next topic is preparing for the interview in virtual interview format. So I know Dr. Riddell already talked a lot about that, and Dr. Modaparthi is here as well, who can answer a few questions from the chat Q&A, as well as just about, approaching the interview process. So Kieran, you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. I actually just saw a question in the chat saying, if you have a behavioral question where your vignettes don't apply, is there a way to be honest about that without making it up? Would it be possible to speak more generally about how you handle a situation where you can't think of an example? So I think that actually ties into something that we do see a lot of when medical students or candidates are asked behavioral questions, open-ended questions, is that there's a little bit of a panic that comes on. And anyone who asks open-ended questions that are behavioral nature consistently in interviews knows that look. And I think that's what Dr. Bodell was talking about with avoiding the appearance of looking panicked. I think that a lot of the vignette preparation that you're going to do now will help you, not for the sake of looking overly rehearsed, because remember, this is a dialogue, not a monologue during the interview, but also just helps you to really start to think on the spot and formulate your thoughts better and express them. And that's really what you need to be able to do in an interview. The content of your question is relevant, of course, especially when we're talking about professionalism, grit, mindset, things like that. But it's as important is the how, how you actually deliver that information to your listener. And so I think this question is really getting at what do we do when we feel panicked. It's actually okay. And I don't know why more people don't do this. Well, I know why I didn't do it, because I was always nervous. So I never could pause. But you have to pause sometimes, take a breath, gathering your thoughts. These sound like crazy things to do, because in your mind, that silence is lasting about an hour and a half. It's actually lasting about 5 seconds, maybe 6 seconds. And that actually can bring you some calmness. Breathing a little bit can decrease your anxiety in a lot of ways. It can decrease your signs of anxiety, which is maybe just as important, if not more, and give you a few seconds to collect your thoughts so that you can actually think about an experience you had that's related to the one the interviewer is asking about, analogous to, or on a tangent even. And once you have that, then you can kind of run with it and feel a little bit more confident about what you're going to say. But if you are immediately dashing into a response, you may walk into something that you can't walk back out from. You may get more tangled. And then when we're quietly listening to you, that just makes you more nervous. So I think you really do have to be comfortable with a few pauses every now and then, because you cannot rehearse for literally every single question that someone's going to give you in an open-ended situation. So I know it's maybe not the answer we want to hear, but I think that it might help you prepare a little bit better. I also wanted to add a few notes. Dr. Bardell's presentation was fantastic on behavioral questions. I also like to ask situational questions. I know a few other interviewers do as well. Behavioral questions basically ask about your past experiences as a way to figure out how you're going to behave in the future. Whereas situational questions are more about your intent and much more about hypothetical situations. So let's say it's 5 p.m. and it's still time to check in baskets. You haven't checked in baskets yet, medical student, but what are you going to do when your fellow resident dumps this work on you and now you have to take the lead? So those are all situational sort of ideas, and those also can be sort of challenging because you haven't been in those situations before. We're still assessing the same behaviors and attributes that we're looking for in residents. And once again, pausing and giving yourself a little time to consider how you want to respond is important. So don't feel compelled to fill every moment.
That's excellent. I would also just add that think about what politicians do. Someone says to the politician, tell me about that dictator in North Korea. And they say, well, I don't know, that's not my area of expertise, but I know about the dictator in Russia. And they spend about 3 minutes talking about the dictator in Russia, and then go around and say, and I bet all dictators are the same, and they bring it back. So there are some times with your prepared vignettes when you can not really have something exactly prepared for the question, but with just a little bit of practice, you can walk it around a little bit and start with the question, talk about what you need to talk about that's important for you to get across, and then wrap it up back around to the original question. And now you're not going to be as good at that as a politician. They do that for a living. But it's a way for them to learn about you, and that's really their only goal. No one is trying to trap you or anything like that.
Yeah, those are great points. I think that's definitely, I've noticed some interviewees actually being really sort of talented at that, where they're sort of diverting me because they don't have an example that's right, on the head of what I want to get at. And I don't discount them for anything because of that. I realize that what I'm asking about is maybe more narrow than their own experiences. And so they're able to make an analogy, and it still ends up being a great response and tells me about them. So I totally agree. And I haven't discounted anybody for that or viewed anybody as, trying to cheat, quote unquote. I really just thought that they're excellent at interviewing, frankly.
There's one other thing, and that is that it actually is okay when someone asks you a question, if you say, that one, it's just a little too personal. And I just don't feel like I can go there and talk about that. But ask me another question, anything you want to ask, but that particular one I'm sensitive to. And I've had people artfully do that for me, and it made me feel badly that I asked a question, or maybe the way I asked the question wasn't right. And there are things that sometimes are too personal for you to talk about. Ilana, what do you have for us?
So next, you guys did great on that. That was a lot of really helpful information, I think. I think especially I really like Bob's point about the personal and sensitive questions because, I always tell applicants, don't include things on your application that you're not comfortable talking about, because anything can be asked that's in your application, but it's also okay to say like, I'm only comfortable talking about a certain part of this or an element of this and then move on. So I think that you guys should feel comfortable being comfortable and not divulging or talking about things that are difficult for you or are going to make the experience much more stressful. All right, so the next topic is the post-interview advice and etiquette, and there's been a lot of questions in the chat about this to address that are kind of related to following up with programs, timing of follow-up after the interview, what factors go into ranking. So Ashley and Janine, I don't know if one of you wants to go first and talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, either way, Dr. Luke, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, I was answering a question.
We can tag team too. Yeah.
Yes, we can certainly tag team. And so I usually recommend, as far as following up after the interview, you know, traditionally before people would send thank yous and things like that, I think following up with an email is certainly appropriate, and most programs aren't going to dock you. But I would say make sure that it's something that's personalized, that it's not just kind of like a blanket email, you know, I'm really interested in your program and I hope that you pick me type of thing. You want to really draw back on, you know, the conversations that you had with the interviewers, what specific examples you can use in order to really convey, like, you know, Yolanda was mentioning, that you're genuine and you have a genuine interest in the program. So certainly you can do it shortly thereafter. Some programs meet right after interviews. Some programs meet closer to the rank list dates. So I think doing it right after, shortly after your interview is appropriate, because that way they still remember and have, you know, clear examples that they can draw from.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. The APD Program Director's Guide, which was put out by our wonderful Residency Program Task Force, recommended for programs to put their follow-up etiquette online from a transparency standpoint. And we have done that. I think a lot of programs have probably done that. In general, like Dr. Luke was mentioning, I would say if you have specific questions or specific reasons to follow up, you want to update your CV, you have a specific pointed question for the program coordinator, one of the residents, the PD, by all means, please reach out for additional and specific follow-up questions. You know, I think in the absence of preference signaling this year, I think there are a lot of questions floating around the Q&A about how to actually follow up with the programs. And as Dr. Luke mentioned, I think it's extremely variable and very program specific in terms of when rank meetings are held. Some programs hold the rank meetings immediately after the interview day each time and go ahead and rank the candidates at that point. Some wait until closer to the NRMP rank deadline. However, at the end of the day, the program director is ultimately responsible and accountable in terms of certifying the rank list. And so I think whenever you feel like you have your rank order in mind, I think it's fine to go ahead and reach out. You know, in absence of preference signaling this year, our program education leadership team has decided to offer our medical students, as Dr. Keller mentioned, to reach out on behalf of those medical students to kind of say, hey, our medical students, you're their #1 program, they're very interested in you, that type of thing. And so I think that can be very, very helpful, but it really does differ by program when that rank actually happens. But I think it's ultimately up to you, and when you make your decision, there's no wrong time to preference signal. There's no wrong time to follow up with specific and meaningful questions. At the end of the day, we're all here for you guys, and as multiple faculty have mentioned, we ultimately just want to find a great fit in both directions.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. I'll open it up briefly just for any other additional comments that the panel has. And then there may be a few questions that we can answer as well, although I know a lot of the questions have been answered already. So certainly applicants and students listening, if you have other questions to ask, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And I'll kind of open it up to see if there's anything else that any of the panelists want to say at this point.
Dr. Luke said something very important that I didn't say. Listen. So when you're at the interview, you're all geared up and you're ready to go and you've got your vignettes and you want to just go, but you need to listen. And that will guide a lot of what goes on and also give you a break from feeling like you're on the spot. So I appreciate that, Dr. Luke.
One thing I thought of, just kind of, that's going to be a little bit different in Zoom. And I'm someone who takes notes a lot. It's just the way that I remember things. So if you are a note taker, it might be helpful to tell the interviewer that you're going to be taking notes, because when you do look down and it makes you look somewhat less interested, that doesn't mean you have to stare at the camera the entire time. But I think, saying, oh, I like to take notes, or just kind of anytime you're not looking at the screen, maybe telling the person you're interviewing with why you aren't.
Yeah, one of the other questions in our section was what factors go into applicant rankings. And I would love to hear what the panel says as a whole, because I think that that's a really important thing. That is another thing from a transparency perspective that I think a lot of programs are putting on their websites. And so that selection criteria should be out on most program websites, so you can get an idea of fit. But I would love to hear what other program directors think around factors going into applicant rankings at your programs and overall.
Yeah, I think this year, it's going to be more difficult just because we typically have rotations. And so a lot of, people aren't able to offer them, or they've had some virtual experiences. And again, these are ways to preference signal, before people would just rotate. And so I think it will be, more difficult this year. But I also would recommend kind of looking at the program's mission. I think for our program, we're very mission driven. And so we like to find, residents that, align with our mission. And so you can look at, specific things about the program. Obviously, we like people who are team players, who work well with others, who are professional at all times. So these are things that, you can certainly speak to as a way of, having yourself stand out. And really, we're also just looking for what makes you unique as well. And so we all, my spin on this part of the question was from the applicant perspective. Ways that you could look: is there going to be a mentor who has the same specialty that you're interested in, and you want to maybe do some research with that person? Or have you, looked at the educational offerings that they have, and is there something that really stands out to you? And so fit, yes, certainly comes from the program, but also from the applicant standpoint. Like, do you see yourself in this program, thriving in this program, and able to really come out on the other side as an excellent dermatologist? And so again, I'll let the other panelists share their thoughts on what specifically they look at, but certainly want to make sure that you're a good fit above all.
Yeah, and I think related, some of the comments that came up, well, just in terms of what are you factoring in, and some of the comments that came up where they ask about, step 2 scores or number of publications, that stuff typically, and at least for me, and I think this is probably true for everyone, that's not really going to sway us after the interview process, right? Like, if we have picked you for an interview, if we've chosen to invite you to an interview, it's because, as I think Yolanda said earlier, like, we think that you're a pretty good fit for our program. And at that point, the playing field is somewhat evened out. And so then we're really looking at, how does the interview go? How did you interact with our faculty? If do we think that you are going to be a good fit once we've met you in person, although not in person this time, but in that setting. And so, at that point, like, if I'm still getting emails, honestly, from people like, oh, I have an update. I published this paper. I got, this step 2 score. Honestly, at this point, like, I don't want to say I don't care. I do care about what you guys did. Obviously, I care about your achievements, but like, that's not going to make a difference right now. And honestly, for me, like, I don't need any more updates. I'm okay getting letters of interest, but I don't need updates of your CVs. It's kind of like, what's done is done now, if the interview invites have already gone out, honestly.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think at this point, the playing field is really leveled, and it's really about, you guys keep hearing the word fit, and what does fit mean? And I think it is absolutely, like Dr. Luke was mentioning, what is the mission of the department and the program? What's the culture of the residency? What are your long-term goals, and do they fit in well with the department and the program? How do you interact with the residents and the faculty? What are you going to be like in my clinic every day? Am I fired up to have you come to my clinic and see my patients and be a part of the care team? I mean, I think it's really, that's what we mean when we say fit. And I think agreed 100%. Once interview invites have gone out and we're really at that point in the process, it really does come down to that favorite 3-letter word, fit.
So just a couple of things I want to mention, because I've answered them a few times in the chat and they keep coming back up, just so we can make sure everybody gets that. Just my opinion. I'm happy to hear other people's opinions as well. But as far as an interview answer, 1 to 2 minutes is about what I'm looking for. Anything less than that is short shifting me. Over 2.5 minutes, it's too much, right? You're blathering on a little bit. The second thing that people asked was about contacting. I think if you haven't gotten an interview right now, tomorrow, tonight, before midnight, I mean, right now is the time to send that interest out. I think if you've gotten an interview and you want to express that interest otherwise, I think day of the interview, night before, or the day after at the latest, because I think, we're going to make our match list literally 45 minutes after we finish the last interview. At least we'll start the process. So if I haven't received it day of, it's not going to make any impact on what I do afterwards.
Matt, there were also several questions about couples matching, which is something you had brought up about sort of the logistics of how do you express that interest? So I guess, how do you particularly express interest if your partner has already gotten an interview someplace and you would like to interview there too? And I think probably we all sort of agree, like, you can actually just send that email and just say, hey, my partner interviewed in, orthopedic surgery at your institution and really loved it. And I'm really excited about your program because of X, Y, or Z. Again, brief, specific, genuine. That's it. Everyone agree with that? And I think beyond that, if it's the same city, but not the same institution, you can certainly say that, right? Like, they interviewed at this program that's also in St. Louis. SLU is also, right? They interviewed at SLU and they love it. We really would love to be in St. Louis. I really love WashU because X, Y, or Z. That's meaningful. Matt, you brought up, like, if the program director of the other program contacts you, that's meaningful. And I 100% agree with that. How do people recommend going about that? I kind of wrote something in the chat, but I'd like to hear how other people approach that aspect.
And one thing I want to mention, because I think there was some confusion in the chat, it is completely okay for a program to say, we're going to rank you #1 on our match list. It is not okay for them to put any pressure whatsoever to make you choose them. But it is always okay for me to shower you with praise. I just should expect nothing in return from that. Okay, so it's okay if your husband, wife, significant other, if their orthopedic surgery program says, we love you, we want you to come here, what can we do to get you here? You then answer, get my wife a spot here or in this city.
Yeah, I think in terms of program directors from other specialties reaching out to us, I think they're more likely to do that after the interview has occurred. And some specialties have already had the interviews, and so they say, oh, we love this person. But I think sometimes, and I do it as well. If I'm seeing that someone that we want to interview is couples matching, then I may reach out to the other program directors just to ask if they have an interview. Again, that's something usually that we're doing, before, but then I think as we're zeroing in on our rank list, there is some more reaching out that occurs as well. So again, I think if you're couples matching and you both really have a strong interest in being at in a particular city or being at a particular place, I think it is worthwhile to reach out to both program directors in both specialties.
And someone brought up, like, the internal communication is when both people have already gotten an interview, not about trying to extend an interview. It can be either. So for example, if your partner has already gotten an interview someplace and they really liked it, they can interview the program director for them, right? So if they're interviewing in orthopedics, they can send that orthopedics program director an email saying, hey, I really loved your program. If it's after interview, they might say, you're my #1 or whatever interest they want to show. And then say, but my partner is applying to derm at your institution and has not heard back yet. Is there any way that you would consider reaching out to dermatology? You can be as simple as that, right? And I think that also goes along with this idea of, can you say you're my #1? What if you're the #2? It's okay to send an email saying, I love the interview process. I remain highly interested in your program. You don't have to put a number on it. But you shouldn't send that email to 20 programs.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. And ethically, you should only send one email that this is your #1 program. That's a big ethical no-no. If otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to say that if you want to do something. Yes, I totally agree.
Right. Yes, you can say you are one of my top programs. I think that's fine. Mm-hmm. We do sometimes know if you lie. So I mean, we can sometimes tell. So it's happened before that someone said you are my #1 and they were ranked to match at our program and they went somewhere else. So I know that they were lying to me, and that does not leave a good taste in your mouth. And dermatology is a small enough specialty that you will be remembered.
Remember, we're going to be your colleagues one day. And so, not that we're going to like have it out to get people because they said that, but like it is, just be genuine, think about your role. It's not just about matching. You're going to be a dermatologist for the rest of your life, hopefully, and you want to be able to interact ethically and mindfully with your colleagues, your current applicant colleagues, and your future other colleagues.
What I tell my students is send 2 emails and write in there you're highly ranked in both those emails. Mm-hmm. You can, and obviously if you only have one, it's okay to send just one email to those one, but that's absolutely it. But I used to tell my students, send out 2 saying you're highly ranked. And that's what I did as a student. I think that's worked out well for my students in the past. But I tell them, just as everyone has said here, they will know definitively and the word will be out on you, and you better hope you don't not match, because if you don't not match, you're hosed.
Another question that just came up, this is also about signaling interest, is about your home program. So one of the issues I'm concerned about is having a PD from my home school reach out to my top program, because I feel like this would lower my chances at my own home program. I want to say this is not true. Listen, we all want you guys to succeed and we want you to be happy. We can't take all of our internal candidates often because either we have too many internal candidates applying. I mean, my gosh, there are schools this year where I saw 13 applicants from the same school. They're not going to be able to take all of their applicants. I have 5 from my own and I have 6 spots. So honestly, I love my applicants, but like I can't take 5. You would prefer to take people from other institutions too. So if they want to go someplace else, I'm thrilled to help them. It doesn't mean that I don't care about them and that I won't rank them highly if I think they're a good fit for my program. And there is no program director I've ever talked to who thinks differently.
Exactly.
I agree. I tell my medical students that when I'm wearing my mentor hat, it's all about them. It's not about me, no ulterior motives. And I think that is universal. Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to recruit them back to Mississippi after they finish at these other programs. That's another story.
Mm-hmm. I want to be mindful of time. Jennifer, what's our time on this? How much? I know it's after 8 o'clock, so I can't remember if we were supposed to do this for an hour and 15 minutes. I know we could answer questions for a long time, but we all have things to do, as you guys do too, so we want to be mindful.
I think we were planning for an hour and 15, so.
Okay. Great. Let's see. I was trying to see if there's so many questions now. There's still a lot of questions about the timing for reaching out to programs. And I think that's come up about differently. It sounds like some of the programs, I know Matt brought this up, that they actually start their ranking process right after interviews. We have, 4 interview days and not everyone is interviewing everyone. So our ranking process won't happen until all 4 of our interviews are done, and then we'll start talking about it. So it really depends on the program. And obviously we're encouraging, as Ashley said, encouraging people to put this on their website. But if you do have an interview and you really loved it and it's a top program, you can go ahead and contact them, immediately. If you still have other interviews and you want to see how things go, that's okay. I mean, you have to do what makes sense for you and don't feel pressure necessarily to do that. A lot of times it doesn't, I don't know. There was also a question related to like, does this make a difference? So for the panelists, if someone says that you're their top program, does that change your rank list? That's, I think, an important question as well.
It does if you get that information out to me before I make my rank list. Absolutely. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, there is something, you want someone who wants you, right? And I always use this example. Getting a residency spot is like being married, okay? You don't want to marry someone who likes you. You want to marry someone who loves you, right? And that love needs to go both ways. And I don't want a resident who likes me or feels like I was the 4th person they could marry. I want them to have wanted to marry me and only me, right? So giving that love is going to innately make me want you more, right? And one thing I'll mention about mentorship is that if you have fear that your program director or your mentor will look at you differently, if you ask them to help you get a spot in another program, they're not a good mentor. Okay, as Dr. Burdell said, you have to have two hats, right? There's your residency director hat and there's your mentor hat. When you have your mentor hat on, there is no judgment whatsoever as to what you're going to do for your residency. And as a student, you need to understand that when they put their residency director hat on, they're not looking at you as the student they've guided and mentored. They're looking at you as whether you're the best fit for their program. And you need to understand that that needs to go both ways.
There's another slightly different twist on that answer. I agree with everything Dr. Keller said, but it actually, you know, I want diversity in my program in all ways. And if I know that somebody's going to come to the University of Mississippi that fills a certain slot, maybe particularly interested in research or whatever that particular thing is, it might actually help me rank others to have the diverse class that I want to have. So I am interested in people that want to come to the University of Mississippi for my own parochial reasons too.
I wanted to add about the post-interview communication that I think that it's tricky, and a few faculty have highlighted this, is that if you send a note that simply says you're interested again, I mean, that's very kind of conventional and not very specific. It's very different than saying that it's your number one choice, you know? So I think that the concerns, I'm seeing a lot of the questions that are in the Q&A are about when to send a post-interview communication and how many can you send and all that. I mean, I really don't think, and maybe other panelists disagree with me, I really don't think there's a lot of weight to a generic message about a program saying, thank you for interviewing me, and I'm really highly interested in your program. I think that's very different than saying you are my number one choice and I am ranking your program number one, things like that, which, by the way, you're not compelled to do, and no one can incite you to send that type of message, by the way. But if you do send it, I think it needs to be, first of all, like Sarvin pointed out, it needs to be one message only that says number one. It can't be 10 messages like that or more. And it really needs to be specific to the program. You have to kind of mean it and for it to be worthwhile.
100% agreement. I think unless there is a very specific question that you're following up on, and a lot of those can go to program coordinators or to residents, really then the major emails or follow-ups we want to hear are, you love us, you want to come to this program. Otherwise, it's kind of generic, and if it's lukewarm, it may hurt you more than help you. I just wanted to highlight one theme I keep hearing over and over again, which is just being genuine. There is no substitute for showing up at an interview and just being who you are. You know, at the end of the day, I think that's what all of us want to see from a program director standpoint, from a chair standpoint, from a just finding great residents and colleagues for our field of dermatology. We want to get to know the genuine you. We want you guys to show up and be who you are. And ultimately, we want to find the right fit for our residency and the right fit for you. Yeah, so I think genuine is just the word I think that just keeps coming up over and over again.
I think that's really important. And I think there are some questions that have come up about, you know, should I bring this up or should I talk about this? Really, you should talk about what is important to you, and you should talk about things that you're comfortable talking about. You should dress in the way that you're comfortable dressing in and that you're confident dressing in. If a program isn't going to choose you because of that, then it's probably not a good fit for you. And I know that's hard to hear because you guys just want to match, and I get it. But you also want to match at a place where you're going to be happy, where you're going to thrive, where you're going to feel supported. And if you're not you, if you're not genuinely you during the interview, then how are you going to find that fit? Then the program is fitting, you know, this persona that you've created and not really you. So please be yourself.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I tell every one of my students, right now is the transition point from I want as many interviews as I can get to I want to find the place that's best for me. So now at this point, the die is cast. You either are or aren't going to match. And now it's a matter of finding the best place for you to match. And guess what? That's probably where you're going to match. If you don't find a place you fit in or feel good at, you're probably not going to match. That's probably the way it's going to work, right? So you want to be yourself. And you know, there's this Kissing Booth movie that everyone's going to laugh at me for having watched with my kids, but she's interviewing at Harvard. And at the end of the interview, the lady says to her, honey, I think you're trying to be who we want you to be. All they really want to know is who you are, right?
And I would say that also gets to some of the questions from like some of the MS2s and 3s who said, is there a certain number of publications? Or no, there's not. Do what's important to you, do what's meaningful for you, do what you love. We can usually tell if you're doing something because you really care about it and it's bringing you professional and personal fulfillment, or if you're just doing it to check a box. So don't check boxes, do what's important to you. I think I know there's a lot of questions left, and so I apologize that we're not going to get to all of the questions. I was trying to see there's a lot of stuff in here that's kind of similar. So I think a lot of these questions we've answered. I will, since we have a few minutes, I would kind of just say maybe let each panelist give 1 or 2 closing thoughts about this whole, process / what's going on. I'll call on you so that we can make it go a little bit quicker. So, Dr. Keller, go ahead. Why don't you go first?
So I mean, I think, you're in the process, you're learning along with us, and as uncomfortable and as scared and reluctant about this process as you are, because it's different, we're just as uncomfortable and scared and reluctant about this process because it's different for us, right? So we're all in this together. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anyone would like to email me, if they don't have a mentor or someone they can rely upon, I'll do my best to try to help you out. I can't help 370 people, but I'll do my best to answer any questions that I can.
Thanks, Matt. Dr. Weissong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if anything from a closing perspective, I would say congratulations, especially to the M4s. You've arrived, and kind of getting to that genuine nature of everything. I think you're no longer jumping through hoops. You're no longer checking boxes to multiple points brought up tonight. Now is the time to be you. Now is the time to put your best foot forward, to be that professional that you want to be, and to show us, who you are. So we can't, from my perspective, we can't wait to meet you on the interview trail. And I know I speak for all the program directors. We are just so excited to meet you all and to welcome you as colleagues to the field of dermatology.
For sure. Dr. Bradal.
Yeah, the most frightened people out there are introverts. And they're thinking, woe is me. I don't really like to talk on the telephone to order things. I like to have my partner do that and whatnot. Trust me that you can put on your doctor hat. I'm back to the hats. And you can be a caring physician that does what's best for every single one of your patients. And you can say that during the interview. This is a little tough for me. I'm introverted, but I'm going to demonstrate to you that I am the kind of person you want. And trust me, when I'm with the patients, they'll know that I care about them, and I always do what's best for every one of them.
Dr. Helfrich.
Yeah, I think something I tell our applicants is, you guys are all so amazing. Reading these applications, it's really hard because you guys are all doing things that are just incredible, volunteering and writing so many papers. I can't even believe it. And the interviews are just another relatively easy step because it's just a conversation. Most of the time you're just interacting with one other person and you're trying to find out about that person and their program, and they're trying to find out about you. And so, don't be afraid to take a deep breath and pause or say, that's a really good question, which is another way to kind of pause while you're thinking about it. And just try to have a conversation and learn something about the place that you're interviewing. And that's all we're trying to do. So I know it can be intimidating, but the most of the work has been done, and we're just looking forward to meeting you. And I think it's really a fun day. It's always exhausting, but it's because I'm an introvert, but it's a fun day, and we really like learning about you.
Dr. Luke.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that, all the panelists have said thus far. One thing that I'll kind of just hopefully reassure you, our goal is not to really intimidate. I think most programs, we really just want to get to know who you are as a person and really kind of, explore some of your interest in derm and if you'd be a great fit at our program. So don't feel too intimidated. Obviously, it's impossible to prepare for every single type of question, but just make sure that you know your application and that you've kind of rehearsed at least, some common themes and have these things prepared. And then really just relax and have a good conversation with each of the programs, because really that's all we're trying to do is get to know you better.
Great. And Dr. Motaparthi?
Yeah, I would say, if you're a dermatology applicant, you've already spent a good amount of time being well prepared in life and in school. And so this is another opportunity to prepare. It's a dialogue. It's as much a recruitment tool as a selection tool as well. And you're picking us just like we're picking you. The matches not only on one person's side here, it really does help applicants. So you have a lot of pluses already on your side here. And as hard as it is, or as hard as it seems, or as stressful as it may appear to be, it's really an opportunity to show your best. And you can even have a good time. You can even smile. You can even crack a joke, as long as it's appropriate. And and I think that you'll come away feeling like you actually enjoyed a lot of interviews rather than feeling like they were going to be the worst moments ever. They're not going to be. They're going to be good. So good luck.
Yeah, I think that's all fantastic advice. And I thank the panelists so much for being here and for all of the DIGA crew for setting this up. I hope that this has been helpful for everyone. And I think as you could hear from all of us, like, we are here to help you. We're not here to ask you crazy, weird questions. I know there were some things in there asking about, like, what if they ask you about derm knowledge? You're starting residency. We don't expect you to know dermatology at this point. People aren't here to quiz you or test you. And if they are, then maybe that's not the best fit for you, and that's okay too, right? So really listen to your gut while you're at these interviews. You will get a feel of fit, even though you can't visit. You will get a feel from talking to residents, checking out websites, checking out social media, interacting with faculty. You will get so much information from that. So don't be so worried about that aspect. I think people are really concerned, like, how will I know? I think you guys will get a lot of information from the interview days, as long as you are yourself and you listen to your gut. So good luck to everyone. Good night. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating.
Good luck.